I've got just a few news articles this week or this meeting. Not a ton. It's been a relatively slow news cycle for UAS right now. But one of them was one Dave posted up on our Facebook page, which was from Vic Moss, Hobby versus 107 Unscrambled. So he goes into quite a bit of depth here on these, on the differences, kind of breaking it out, making it a little easier to understand. It's not a terribly long article, but it kind of hits the high points of the differences between Hobby and 107. So I am going to drop that in here. Definitely a good read, and Vic definitely knows what he's talking about. He's been a big advocate for UAS, generally on the commercial side, but definitely on the entirety of the issue. Definitely somebody who we respect and who has a great background in the industry. Second to that is a little bit of a fun one. This comes from Drone DJ, but Neil deGrasse Tyson had Nurk on Star Talk, talking about how the brain kind of compensates for speed, and he talks to both Nurk and to a NASCAR driver regarding the differences between them. So that was a really good episode. It was only 15 minutes long. Definitely a quick watch.
Yeah, I'll have to watch that. I assumed that was like a rerun of his previous
original
one where he was flying around in his office.
Yeah, so this one's definitely a new one. He's comparing the differences of going essentially 90 miles per hour with a drone versus 200 miles per hour on the NASCARs. So
and just like a lot of drone pilots, they only turn left.
Right.
Turn left, go fast.
So definitely an interesting watch. I do highly recommend it. Let's see. I had another one here. Where'd it go? Shoot. We all saw up above Patrick Egan did 2 articles on SUAS News, one regarding the AMA and their essentially funding and advocacy and stuff like that. Second one was on the FAA UAS Symposium and AVUSI regarding some of the interesting money behind the meetings and whatnot. So he poses some interesting questions down at the bottom. New regulation for the hobbyist. What does it cost? How is it administered? What about expiration? Any ideas why the education instead of enforcement program hasn't worked? What other types of data does the FAA believe it needs? Where is it cataloged? How's it going to be certified? So on and so forth. So
yeah, Egan is a pretty good distribution, but we have to be careful and vet what it is that he says.
Yeah. So just a couple of interesting articles. Again, kind of a slow week in terms of news. There were a couple other ones where they were using drones to pollinate flowers using bubbles and pollen in absence of bees. But beyond that, it's really kind of slow. I kind of wanted to dedicate some of the time to the Drone Advisory Committee meeting that Dave attended. I've watched a fair portion of it. I haven't gotten through all of it yet. Dave, what were your thoughts on the DAC meeting?
Well, this is, I spend a lot of time dedicated to the Drone Advisory Committee, probably approaching 20 hours a week. And we, and so we do not have a seat on the DAC. There is an open nomination that will close in August. So I'll be applying. We'll see what happens. This is my 4th and 5th tasking group that we've worked on, and one of the questions is, well, what's happened, and what's been the benefit of spending this sort of time and this sort of energy on the Drone Advisory Committee? And so far, it's a good question, because we've I spent time on the remote identification tasking group that was submitted in October. That was ignored with the NPRM. I spent time on the UAS facility program. That remains to be seen. The FAA will be responding in October in terms of what they'll do in terms of the recommendations that we put forward. We recommended that the UAS facility maps be split. So where they have 1 degree by 1 degree, it'd be half a degree by half a degree on the grid. So that would be 4 squares where there is currently 1. We also recommended shielded operations and pointed how it is referenced how it is working in New Zealand. Thank you, Bruce. I led a subgroup underneath the BVLOS and presented both the facility maps and the C2 spectrum subgroup on 27 February 2020, and we were very critical of the FAA not working with the FCC, not protecting spectrum for aviation use, particularly UAS use that has been allocated. And then most recently, what was presented last week was the summary of unmanned traffic management, and it was a critique or a review of the CONOPS version 2, which is a requirements document for unmanned traffic management. So we were able to get some changes or some recommendations into that. Most notably, we pushed for manned aircraft participation in the UTM to be voluntary. There were several groups that wanted no participation whatsoever. They wanted nothing to do with UTM, and we were able to create a bit of a coalition and gain everyone's agreement. And one of the strange bedfellows that we were able to work with was NACTA. It's the Air Traffic Controller Organization. And so they want to be able to have access to UTM information. And I think that's frankly great, because that helps us. The other was that not only in the UTM, but also in the safety culture, tasking group, we put forward and gained agreement on the idea of proportionality between regulations and risk. And so on the safety culture tasking group, the objective of that tasking group is identify how we can take the great safety culture of manned aviation and move it over to UAS. And of course, it should be move over all that is applicable. Some of the folks are very excited to carry over all aspects of safety culture in manned aviation, including things like the Safety Management System, SMS, and its 4 pillars. Lots of detail. And so we have gained agreement that was what was presented last week, that there must be a proportionality to the regulations and to the risk. And we have again and again pointed out that in manned aviation back 70, 80 years, regulations as well as manufacturer enhancements have come about after huge tragedies, loss of life, big accidents, hundreds of people died, and a change was made to the regulations, or manufacturers figured out how to do things better. And we have pointed out again and again that if we were to measure the efficacy of safety as fatalities, then drones are the safest hobby, safest recreation, and in terms of Part 107 in the United States, the safest vocation that we know of, with 0 fatalities.
And it was very nice that Brendan brought that fact up during the live DAC meeting last week.
Yeah, for sure.
Brendan Schulman works for recreational and for commercial drones in many different ways, and we're lucky to have an advocate like him. He is a Harvard attorney, and so he's got deep skills, and we appreciate him a lot. And he's got a good approach. And that there was another brief segue from the DAC. We pointed out a panel where a young woman by the name of Sam Sachs, S-A-C-K-S, put forward the idea that legislation like House Bill 4753, which stipulates a country of origin view, meaning that if the legislation essentially says for a bind and fly drone produced in China, it won't be sold to a federal agency, and no federal funds may be used to purchase the drone. And so this legislation passed the House on 10 February and is likely to come up in the Senate this fall. And if it does not pass the Senate, there is an executive order that mirrors the legislation almost exactly, and that will probably be signed into place. So this Sam Sachs put forward the idea that type of legislation creates a fragmentation in innovation, and a fragmentation and a slowing of innovation. I think that's a great premise, and one that we will be putting forward in our overall congressional campaign, and as we ask folks to take do a little copy and paste and send to their congressmen and senators, congresswomen who are on the transportation subcommittees. But that's a brief segue off into another topic. But the DAC was as we expected, no additional tasking groups, and so on the safety culture, we continue forward. Thank you to everyone here who responded to the survey I put together. I'm presenting that to my subgroup tomorrow. And it's a pretty knowledgeable group. On the subgroup that I'm leading, we've got Boeing and BNSF and ALPA and AOPA and Dallas Police and a couple others. And
Is it too late to fill out that survey still?
It's getting a little late. If someone wants to add comments, I'm happy to update the numbers, and also keenly interested in any comments. I did get the folks on the FPVFC Facebook group should be pleased. They created almost as many comments as we got from the Rotor Riot group, and of course they have 33.4 thousand subscribers, and together we had more than 10 separate commercial drone Facebook groups. So interesting that our recreational teams are taking regulation a little bit more seriously. So welcome the comments, welcome additional votes. It's easy for me to update the numbers.
Josh, do you have that link handy, or Dave?
For the survey?
Yeah.
Let me grab that real quick.
Can't seem to find it at the moment.
That's okay, I got it. Let's see.
Yeah, if you grab the the one that we have on Google Forms that will automatically update. I won't have to go out and.
We don't want to make you do any extra work.
Well, just
at the last minute.
Okay. I just want to know which
I'm gonna get signed into the right account here. Give me 1 second. Should try.
Any questions or comments? I mean, and I apologize for the alphabet and abbreviation soup. And that's one thing that coming from global tech, I'm very accustomed to living in an environment where you have to quickly learn a new vocabulary of abbreviations and acronyms, and certainly the FAA is the same type of environment. So I apologize if some of what I said was not understandable given all of the abbreviations and acronyms.
Yeah, it's tough when two different groups use the same acronyms for different things, and you start to get confused.
Yes.
Seeing it in the folder. Hang on, I'll grab it from Facebook.
That's where I went to look for it, and it's like, I can't find it. I know it's out there, but Facebook likes to hide things. Once you've seen it, you'll never see it again.
Right.
Down the memory hole.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't use the 1 of 5, 2 of 5, 3 of 5, 4 of 5.
Yeah, no, I won't use those.
I'm curious if anybody here has questions about the DAC, or how many of you watched it live or have watched the replay since then?
So I've watched most of the replay. I kind of skipped to some of the highlights. I found they did talk about the two subjects. I found the questions in between probably a little more engaging and informative. There was a gentleman. I've got it pulled up here. I'm trying to. I think it was Mark Colburn or Colborn.
C-O-L-B-U-N, Colburn. He's the colonel in the Dallas Police. He's a helicopter
so he
pilot.
was the one asking some pretty relevant questions about transponder, like basically implementation of remote ID. I don't want to say transponders, but and he kind of summarily got shut down by Jay Merkel.
Right.
But
the DJ, and looking at the notes here, the DJI guy was Brendan Schulman. Agreed. Great guy.
And he was one of the only people that were there that was actually also in the YouTube comments and writing back and forth with people, which I thought was great.
Oh. Good. I'll keep that. I like the Lane Chow's performance. Astounding. Ooh. Ooh. Ooh.
Yeah, all those manned drone flights around the U.S. right now. Maybe she knows something we don't.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not
Bruce,
finding
you do
your
know
survey,
that. You do know,
Dave.
Yeah, Bruce, you do know who Elaine Chao's husband is? That's the majority leader of the United States Senate.
Mitch McConnell.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like if you have the helicopter folks, like for example the one you cited earlier, especially on the police side, that are constantly over large urban areas, they're going to be pretty low to the ground. Those folks might be common allies if you're trying to get more buy-in to UTM, at least voluntary. I'm sure they would love to have some sort of equipment in their helicopter to be able to see what's going on up there.
That is, if you'll forgive the expression, a big 10-4. Mark is a huge advocate of, he would like to see mandatory participation, frankly, from any manned aircraft who are routinely operating below 400 feet. He's been, Mark and I have worked on a couple of tasking groups, and so he's been a fantastic advocate, and he is retiring from the Dallas PD. So, and he has a seat on the DAC. So we are hopeful that he will continue working on the DAC, and that's really good for us.
Fair enough.
I think I found the right link to the survey.
Did you get it?
I grabbed that one from our other chat, so hopefully that's the right one.
Yeah, I guess and looks good.
Oh, I just found it too. There we go.
For all manned aircraft required to have radios and ADS-B, none of which are required in Class G. Yes, it would. It would be nice. And the current ADS-B out coverage, so they called it ADS-B 2020. And so the vision was that all manned aircraft were supposed to have ADS-B out as of January 1st, 2020. And this initiative was started in 2010. So it only took 10 years to roll out. And the coverage is approximately between 50 and 56%. And so there are a number of exceptions and waivers. And so it certainly would be nice. And this is a stipulation that we get into, or a discussion that we get into when the manned aviation groups are saying, well, UAS is the newcomer. You have to do detect and avoid all by yourself. We're not, we don't want any participation, and you have to figure this out. And so that does result in some heated discussion.
So when the remote ID rules come out and there's only 50% participation from the drone pilots, does that mean we're doing good?
Well,
I mean,
one thing.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
One of the aspects on the survey that did surprise me is that both in commercial as well as recreational, we give the FAA the benefit of the doubt every time, and so maybe we're just too nice, and so we feel that the FAA will not be punitive if we're creating an infraction. And so every chance we get, and this is a point that Brendan Schulman has been on, that if we have unreasonable regulations, we will see large-scale non-compliance. And
yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, we've echoed that, verbally as well as in our NPRM comments. What about France? They have RID by Monday, but there are no units for sale. And specs aren't even 100%. Yeah, well,
apparently France is going to be in the same position we were, in which we couldn't fly in controlled airspace for a couple of months.
It's sort of like how we're supposed to have a test, but it's not out yet, and I get questions about that all the time.
Yeah. Hey, Bruce, have you ever sold product in France from an international company?
Not this week, no.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had the pleasure.
So, one of the points that keeps coming to mind, and Dave, help me out with the numbers here, but in terms of total UAS flights, what's the estimate between commercial UAS flights and hobbyists? What's the ratio between hobbyist flights? And I know this can't be, it's not going to be an exact number, but what's your guess?
It's about 7 to 1. Recreational being 7 and 1 being commercial.
So my thought here is and some people have echoed this in chat here or on Facebook and whatnot, is twofold. Number one, if the regulations, if remote ID isn't easily achievable in terms of costs, implementation, devices, so on and so forth, as well as, from that perspective, it's not gonna. I mean, we've said it. It's not. You're gonna have a lot of non-compliance.
Right.
There needs to be, and again, we've talked about this before. There needs to be an incentive for remote ID. So whether it's easy authorization of beyond visual line of sight in terms of real long range, not just going behind a tree beyond visual line of sight, and even more so in the current climate with what's going on into politics, and not to bring a bunch of politics, but how are they going to enforce it? We've talked about this, and I've advocated that police can enforce this, and they can utilize the LEAP program, which is the Law Enforcement Assistance Program. However, in the current climate, what's the likelihood of that happening? So I just question the feasibility of the entire thing. Second to that, watching the DAC meeting and watching all the other DAC meetings that have happened, and I'm sure I can echo a lot of people, and just echoing the comments on the YouTube video here, is that, no representation, or little representation, let me put it that way. And very placid representation, I guess, from a hobbyist perspective. I mean, really, we've got Brendan Schulman who actively advocates for the hobbyists. I'm sure,
right, and was involved in ARC, Assure, the ASTM work. Yeah, he's been here
and he's
since it started.
And he's awesome. I mean, I love Brendan. He's definitely got that front and center on his mind. But with the current, as they announced at the DAC meeting, and actually shortly before, is that they are taking recommendations for 5 new seats. So I'm sure, some of those seats, I'm hoping that we can get filled in with some recreational folks.
All 5 of
them. Right. Well, I mean, when
should.
You have a 7-to-1 ratio of recreational flights versus commercial flights, some of that should be represented.
But I'm sure some of the commercial people would say the reason is the regulations are getting in the way. They can't do flights right now.
That's right.
Yeah. So, I'm just, I know I'm preaching to the choir when I'm saying these things, but, I just really feel that, we really need to push, and whether that's, I've seen people wanting to recommend Bixler. I definitely want to recommend Dave. He's been there doing the work. So I think, Dave, you definitely would be favorable.
Is the nomination process specifically for a person, or can it be an organization, or a combination?
It's for an individual.
Okay.
And so you come representing an organization and a constituency, but I will. So
what if you get fired from that organization, or retire from it, or I don't know? Well, it just seems strange.
Potentially, why seats are opening.
It doesn't seem strange because we've got the chair of the DAC, Michael. I always get his name mixed up. Clausen or Chasen? Chasen was his job changed, and so you'll see that he's no longer the CEO of Precision Hawk. He's now the chair of the advisory board. So he is no longer a day-to-day employee of Precision Hawk. So it appears that they keep you on at least for the 2-year term, but it probably will impact your renewal of your seat. But I'm taking that purely my own speculation and observations. I also wanted to mention, as we're talking about remote ID, that one of the gentlemen who they introduced as the designated federal officer, that I have learned is a very important position on any advisory committee. And so he was the ranking executive in the room and stayed in the meeting throughout, and that was Dan Ewell. And Dan said, we are targeting December, parenthetically, 2020, to publish the final rule of remote ID. And so we all know that the FAA is not necessarily great at making their dates. Yet, we remember last year they said, well, we're going to get the remote ID NPRM out in 2019, and by gosh, they did. If I remember right, it was December 26th. Yeah. So we want to be prepared and be able to respond as quickly as we can. And This is why we feel that things like the protest that the UFDA crew hosted and ran on 28 February was effective, and we feel that the congressional push is also required as we potentially move toward a new administration. And if that happens, we'll see a change in the transportation secretary and very probably a change in a number of the senior executives in the FAA.
Say, Dave, has anybody ever mentioned that FAA protest during any of your DAC meetings or dealings with people?
Only the communications people. They were. It was obvious that it was very much being discussed during the February 27 DAC, and of course, the FAA closed their site on the Friday the 28th. Right. So that cheered me up. So they've not. They've not talked to me about it. They didn't bring it up in any open discussions, but it absolutely was a point of a topic of communication inside the FAA at the senior management level.
Yeah, it's just, I'm what it's.
If they don't change anything, they'll be able to make it today.
Yeah, right.
But then why not just release it today?
Yeah, it was also. It was also interesting and a little picky, but Dan Ewell said, well, we're reviewing the 53,000 comments. And of course, back now, several months ago, Jay Merkel said, we have completed the review of all 53,000 comments on the NPRM. So I'm sure it was a slip of the tongue with Dan, because Jay Merkel is on top of this with precision.
So my question is, reading the room, with the people that you've had dealings with and whatnot, what's your thought on, the course of remote ID? Do you have any thoughts on where it's headed? Do you see change? Do you not see change?
I'm hoping that what we'll see is an acceptance that there's a division between line of sight and beyond visual line of sight. And that if it's beyond visual line of sight, that much of the equipment and the regulations that we saw in the remote ID NPRM will be put in place for beyond visual line of sight. I'm hoping that we'll be able to see something that is line of sight. So Bruce is saying that RID is fait accompli. I don't think that's necessarily the case. Real money's made the industry and the provision of UTM. Well, I don't know about. I wouldn't. I don't think UTM is a moneymaker. There's not a lot of margin in the UTM. So having come from global tech, and sitting in on and working on ConOps V2, once again, the FAA is looking to outsource, and by outsource, I mean looking to private companies to pick up the ball and run with the remote ID USS. And so those are the service support or service suppliers that would be a federation of, if you will, companies that run an air traffic management or air traffic control for UAS across the United States. So technologically non-trivial, and not it's not so easy to make money on something like that. So we'll see what happens, and I think there's a good appreciation that they can't charge themselves out of existence. So the FAA does not want to subsidize these organizations, and I don't think it's viable, even at a low price, to be a high margin business, given the infrastructure that's required. So to me, some of the money will be in niche cargo and delivery. that to me is where the money is going to be. And those companies scare me from a perspective of they have no interest in recreation, and notably that's Amazon.
Well, the other thing, don't forget, Amazon has incredible web services. That's where most of their money's made right now.
AWS.
Yes.
The cloud, more than web services, cloud.
Well, okay, so let's say Amazon gets involved with the UTM system. Can
Well,
they
they are.
remain unbiased with their system with anyone else involved? Like translation, are they going to be able to see what their competitors are doing more so than what is publicly available when you register and you're supposed to get the correct information? I mean, they're going to have information from everything in this system, right? If they're running it.
Not necessarily. And so this is what's in the it's called the FAA Information Management System, and so it's not well spec'd and it's not well defined, and so this is one of the aspects that I don't see the UTM happening very quickly, but it does not appear that one RSS could have any access of information into another RSS. And so it's things like, well, will there be a single registration? And so that if I fly across the boundary, I have a single identifier, even if it's a pseudo identifier that's notified in the database. They've not settled that yet. So I mean, it's such fundamentals that they really haven't thought through. But it does not appear that there's no financial, there's no size, there does not appear to be a lot of access to data peer-to-peer across RSS to RSS. Great question.
So, I just wanted to touch on something Bruce said. They can charge whatever they want because the regs make a UTM mandatory. And then below, exactly the money is in the provision of services. So two things I would say that kind of will mitigate that. Number one, there's going to be multiple USSs, or UTMs, or one UTM, multiple USSs. So your service suppliers. Number one, that creates a competitive environment. They're going to be competing for customers, so you don't want to price. You'll have kind of the standard capitalism price war happening in order to secure, as well as what the service provides. Second to that is going to be the same problem that I mentioned earlier with remote ID, is that if you price it too high, you're not going to have compliance. So again, that goes into the cost of remote ID, itself. Is it easy to implement? Is it cheap? Or at least cost, doesn't price people out of the hobby or the industry. And what kind of benefit does it offer? So those are the kind of the thing that will keep the price, I think, competitive at least. I don't know. That's just my general assumption. Just a thought on that. So.
Yeah, and the amount of automation that's required in each. So any company that is a big software developer will have a leg up, because as a UTM or as an RSS scales, it has to be automated in order to be profitable as it scales. Because while service provisioning can be lucrative from a revenue generation, it is not necessarily profitable if you don't scale very efficiently. I don't mean to be going off the deep end here on public cloud adoption. Yep. IBM Cloud, look at that.
So yeah, I would say, I mean, they can, but again, there's each different cloud option, there, each one of them provides different benefits. So, obviously AWS is probably going to offer the most benefits. So just a thought there, but and I would agree with XJet. I would say that infrastructure, two-part. I would say they probably are somewhat interested in delivery drones, but building the infrastructure to create a UTM similar to their AWS is going to be a big push for them. I would definitely say that.
Yeah. To me, I don't think Amazon is terribly interested in the RSS. I think they're interested in providing everyone the software that's going to run it. That's where it gets lucrative.
Yeah. So Google's is in every game. Let's just be real. They own the game. So yeah, just some thoughts on remote ID. Thank you, Dave, for your insight and what's going on with the DIC. I do encourage. Let me drop the link to the DIC meeting in case somebody wants to watch that. I will drop it in here. So I will say that Brendan did a stand-up job as usual, supporting the hobby, and do pass along my thanks to him. And yeah. Any other questions or things that you would like us to touch on this evening? We have about 14 minutes before I give you back your evening. Anybody? Bruce, how are things going with your CASA over there?
With CAA, yeah, interesting.
Or CIA, yeah.
The 1 week investigation moves into its 4th week.
Oh, hey.
Yeah. I think it sounds like with this current human malware problem, they can't find enough rope to hang me, so they've had to import some, and shipments are really slow at this time of the year, so we're just waiting.
All right.
It's good to hear that the CAA hits their deadlines as well as the FAA does.
The thing that really concerned me most was that the investigator I was talking to was completely unaware that drones and model aircraft were subject to exactly the same rules. He thought there'd be different rules for model aircraft. He thought drones had their own set of rules. And this is the guy that's investigating me into my potential breaches of the regulations, but he doesn't know the regulations, and that doesn't inspire a lot of confidence.
When you have to train the person who's investigating you, that doesn't bode well, I'd imagine.
And the real bottom line is going to be: is this about safety or compliance? That's why I've been sort of trolling them a bit and baiting them a bit, because I want to know: are they interested in safety or are they interested in compliance? Because they're not one and the same thing. And I think the issue of safety should always trump the issue of compliance. And I want to make a point out of this. And nobody knows what's happening, and the rules here are quite overreaching in some cases. Like you got to get permission of property owners to fly over property, whereas you can fly a 172 over the same property without any permission whatsoever. We've got good bits. We've got the shielded operation, which is fine. But interestingly enough, you can fly a shielded operation beside our biggest international airport. Can't fly it beside a military base, Air Force military runway. So what is the purpose? Is it about safety or is it about something else? And so there's too much wavering going on, and our regulations came out 5 years ago and have not been updated. During that time, technology has advanced amazingly. I mean, maybe the need to have a spotter with the old analog gear and a SD camera with crappy 5.8 analog video was a thing, but these days with DJI Digital, you have HD vision in your eyes with a massive field of view. You are much better equipped to fly without a spotter than you used to be, but the regulations don't even take that into consideration because they're half a decade out of date.
Well, I mean, here's the thing: is I don't think right now, as of right now, I don't think any regulation can be slated towards enhancing safety on something that has a perfect safety record. Now, can it be preventative? Yes, but I don't see why one would cite safety as a means to crack down on, basically featuring more regulations. So it's about something else. I would say it's more about risk mitigation in terms of security would be my ultimate guess in terms of potential threats and whatnot.
I hear that, and like in Europe, if you've got a camera on your drone, you have to be registered. If it's 250, you don't have a camera, you don't. But the security thing is, why aren't we also looking at Nikon P1000s? I can sit on a hill, I can peer in people's backyards, I can peer in their bedroom windows with a camera. They don't even know I'm there. I can peer into sensitive military installations by finding the right hill. I can fly a 172 over them, and they won't know what's going on. So they're trying to find reasons to create regulation, and that's not the right way to do it. It's all out of sync. And I look at it, I fly a sub 250 drone. I'm in full control all the time, and if something goes wrong, it falls to the ground, and even if it hits someone, it's not going to hurt them. But that has to be strictly regulated. Yet in exactly the same space, I can take a football, kick it at 60, 70 miles an hour, hit someone in the head and really injure them. But that's not regulated. I can do that freely, but I can't fly my little drone in the same place. There are agendas going on here. It's partly ignorance, but it's also agenda. There are many things happening, not for reasons of safety, and I get really annoyed when we're lied to about the justification for these regulations. Oh, it's all about safety or security. No, I think there are commercial imperatives going on here, and they need to be disclosed. Otherwise, it's a fraud.
Mm-hmm. I've got a 30-foot pole for getting drones out of a tree that I put a GoPro on. I can just walk around with that.
You should say that. I did that. I did that, and I got told off. Oh, you're flying a drone dangerously, until I actually showed the back footage, which had a Mobius on a big long stick.
That's awesome. So, one of the things that I've noticed a lot of, there was one news article, I didn't, bring it in for tonight, but was on a new, basically U.S. government taking possession of some anti-drone technology, basically, essentially an RF spammer that breaks the RF connection from a drone to the controller. And the funny thing that they cite, that the company cites, is that it instigates a return to home or forces the aircraft to land. And the funny part is what are they? Are they testing these on exclusively, like, commercial off the shelf that has return to home as a normal function? Let's say they employ that on somebody who's flying an FPV aircraft. And what's it going to do? It's going to fail safe. It's going to drop, below, no matter who's down there, car, person, dog, cat, whatever.
If you're lucky, it flies straight into the person who's jamming it.
Right.
Well, the other thing too is someone's going to do something nefarious. They're going to just program a mission into ArduPilot, and there's not going to be any RF links involved. They won't even have FPV cameras, so they won't be able to detect it using these RF sensing things. And it doesn't matter how much 2.4 or 5.8 gigs you blast at it, it's not going to care.
No, not at all. So it's pretty interesting, these anti-drone technologies that are being deployed right now. So
but this is one thing. Notice how much money's going into these anti-drone technology companies like D-Drone. And this is what I'm getting at. There is so much venture capital being plowed into these companies that do a 3D rendering of some futuristic looking passenger carrying drone, and people throw millions at them, and other companies that promise this, that, and the other. There's going to be, like there was the .com crash, we're going to have the drone crash, when all these investors start saying, where's our money? Where's our return? And the drone companies say, well, not yet. And at the moment, they've been using lack of regulation means we can't do what we need to do. When these regulations come into force, and there is no reason why they shouldn't be delivering on promises, I think there's going to be a lot of really angry investors and a lot of failed companies.
Yep.
Failed companies in what, Bruce? And where do you think these VCs are going to buy in?
Drone delivery, for example, it's never going to be a viable thing. The economics don't stack up. That the one flight and then having to put a new battery and the size and so forth. And if you look at the UK, they've got a place called Milton Keynes, and they've got these little robots that trundle around the streets because they have cycleways that connect the whole town. They've got ground-based vehicles. They can carry much greater loads. If something goes wrong, they just stop and no one gets hurt. And they're already doing massive deliveries all over Milton Keynes. We've got Tesla with their auto-drive cars, and that's only a step away from having completely automatic or autonomous vehicles that will just drive around. You'll be sitting in your home, you'll get a text that says, you have a package arriving in 5 minutes, here's your PIN code. You walk out to the sidewalk, the autonomous vehicle pulls up, you enter your PIN code, a door opens, you take your package out. That's drone delivery. It's nothing to do with flying. It's going to be on the ground because safety and practicality and economy dictates that.
Or a combination of the two. In the United States,
Yeah,
we've
I
been
think
seeing trucks that have like a drone on top, so they complete like the last mile deliveries in rural areas, and the driver
right,
obviously is nearby, and it's like almost semi-autonomous behavior.
It was
right.
interesting during the lockdown period. One of the guys that was doing these drone delivery things was interviewed, and he said it's not the last mile that's the problem, it's the last 10 feet. Because if you're landing in someone's backyard, you've got trees and shrubs and bushes and people with poles wanting to steal your drone, and ultimately, vehicular delivery is going to be the way to do it. You cannot deliver a pizza for less than the price of a pizza.
You all got too many damn poles. That's the thing going on.
That's funny. I think that there was a article I posted. Oh man, it was probably a couple meetings ago that said in rural areas, drone delivery makes sense. In heavily populated like metropolis areas, New York City, Chicago, Phoenix, it makes less sense because there's too much stuff in the way. There's too much navigation, too much, everything. Whereas, a straight flight out and back, as the bird flies, is much more efficient. That doesn't mean it's going to take off, but there have been instances, especially during the COVID, where they are delivering blood samples and tests and whatnot. But it's been an interesting period for that kind of testing. And then I know there's a company, and I forget their name. They're in Africa. They've been
Zipline.
Yes, Zipline. Thank you. They've been delivering vaccines, but they're using fixed wing to do that, and they're deploying. Obviously flying over and deploying via parachute those vaccines, and then the fixed wing UAV cycles back and is captured back at home base. So,
there will be specific cases where this is viable and practical, but the concept that's being sold to investors and the public is that, you'll call a pizza, it'll be delivered by drone, you'll order something from Amazon, it'll arrive by drone in your backyard. That just is not going to happen anytime in our lifetimes.
I think the use case to make it profitable is going to be, is it extremely time sensitive? Is it a low, weight and payload? Or is it extremely difficult to get to, so that it behooves you to use something that's airborne as opposed to using a boat, a car, a truck, multiple modes to get to an island.
A 30-cent slingshot will accomplish all that. The drone will do with that.
Well, I think I would agree. I would think it time sensitive to me seems like the most applicable category for the means test. So things like vaccine delivery, maybe transplant delivery.
But that's another one, because that organ movement has been touted as, this is going to be getting a heart or a kidney. But hang on a minute, all hospitals have helipads and we have helicopters, and you're going to take it from one hospital to another. So why would you use a drone when you've got the technology there already, and it's safe and reliable and proven? And it's not going to be any cheap.
I would say the means test would be cost. You can operate a drone for much, much less than you can for a helicopter. So
in Switzerland, where they were trying that, though, they've cancelled that test program because the drones crashed.
Well, again, I would say as technology gets more reliable, it would be let me put it that way, it would be an appropriate use of the technology. The same reason that a lot of people are using drones in movies. Definitely, you can get in tighter shots. You can do different things with the drone, but the cost of hiring a helicopter and a pilot and the jet fuel and everything else, saves money for other aspects of the production.
And the safety as well. The safety of drone operations are always going to be safer, because anytime you lift someone off the ground, you put their life in danger.
Yep.
The other thing is these urban mobility passenger drones, basically. Seriously, I'm not getting in any flying machine where the pilot is still on the ground.
I think I saw something where was it India or somebody that they have a police quadcopter bike kind of thing, and it crashed the other day.
It was Dubai. The police flying mode. You know what happened? He switched it to rape mode.
That's awesome. So, at any rate, definitely a interesting conversation. It'll be interesting to see where this goes. I just, I don't want to see this hobby die. I don't want to see it regulated to death. I just feel like, and I'm sure most of you here would agree that, when it comes to the DAC, we need some better hobbyist representation because hobbyists do make up most of the flights. And, that kind of consideration, I think, would go a long way. As well as, it seems like that, the DAC makes recommendations and they go nowhere. So that's kind of tough to watch sometimes too. So be interesting to see some better buy-in from the FAA on something that they're touting as
So is the difference between
necessary.
the DAC and the CDA is just the arrangement of the letters, isn't it?
Sometimes, yeah, it feels that way. But at any rate, with that note, if there's anybody have any other questions, comments, concerns, ideas? All right, good meeting tonight, guys. I appreciate all the feedback and the questions and the comments. Definitely always welcome. So on that note, I will see you guys next meeting and reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you all. Take care. Have a good evening.